Have you ever really thought about what keeps your cells alive and kicking? You know, it's not just some simple bag holding all the important bits in. Nope. It's more like an incredibly smart, superactive border patrol agent, and we call it the cell membrane. Today, we are diving deep into how this amazing structure decides who gets a visa to enter and who gets turned away at the border. And the craziest part? It does all of this without spending a single drop of energy.
So let's start with the big question, right? Every single second of every day, your cells are making these life or death decisions. They have to let in the good stuff like nutrients and oxygen, but slam the door on things that could be harmful. They've got to take out the trash, but hold on to all the essential materials. So how on earth do they manage this constant, super complex traffic control? Well, let's find out.
All right, first up, the cell's smart barrier. See, to really get how things move in and out, you first have to appreciate the barrier itself. This is not a wall. It's a dynamic, almost intelligent surface that is absolutely essential for survival.
And the magic word here is selective. Think of it like a bouncer at the coolest club in town. It's got a very, very specific guest list. This whole property is called selective permeability, and it is everything. I mean, if a cell loses this ability to choose, it's game over. It gets destroyed.
So who's on the VIP list that gets to just waltz right in? Well, small, uncharged molecules like oxygen and carbon dioxide, they get an easy pass. Same goes for stuff that's fat-soluble, like certain vitamins. They can just slip right through the membrane's fatty core. But look who gets stopped at the velvet rope. Charged ions, even tiny ones like sodium and potassium, denied. And big molecules like sugars and amino acids, no way. They are just too big. And this creates a huge problem, right? How do cells get these essential things inside if they're blocked at the door?
Well, the simplest solution to that problem is to just go with the flow. And that brings us to our next section, which is all about something called passive transport. These are the genius ways cells move materials without spending any energy at all. They basically let nature do all the heavy lifting for them.
And the engine that powers this completely free ride? It's called the concentration gradient. It is a fundamental law of the universe. Molecules just do not like being crowded together. They will always, and I mean always, try to spread out from where there's a lot of them to where there are fewer of them. It's just like rolling downhill. It's the path of least resistance.
And if that sounds a bit abstract, this analogy makes it crystal clear. Imagine you open a bottle of perfume in the corner of a room. Right at first, the scent is super strong right there. That's your high concentration. But what happens next? Those little fragrance molecules start to spread out. They diffuse, until pretty soon you can smell it all the way across the room. Eventually, they spread out so evenly that the concentration is the same everywhere. That whole process, that's diffusion.
And this is why diffusion isn't just some neat science concept. It's absolutely vital for life. For instance, when a person gets dehydrated, their cells lose water. This makes the fluid inside, the cytoplasm, get all thick and sludgy. It's like trying to swim through honey instead of water. Everything slows way down, including the diffusion of crucial molecules. And for the neurons in your brain, that slowdown can be catastrophic. It can lead to unconsciousness or even a coma.
Okay, so simple diffusion is great for the VIPs, the ones that can just walk right in. But what about all those essential molecules that got turned away at the door? I'm talking about the sugars, the amino acids, the ions. They also need to move down their concentration gradient, but the membrane itself is blocking them. So how do they get an escort?
And that brings us right to our third section, getting a helping hand. This is where we see how the cell gets really clever, using special proteins to give these blocked molecules the help they need to cross the border. This is a process called facilitated diffusion, and facilitated is just a fancy word for helped. The cell puts these special proteins right into its membrane, and they act like a personal escort service. But here's the crucial part. It's still passive. It costs zero energy. The concentration gradient is still doing all the work. These proteins are just opening up a safe pathway.
Now, these protein helpers come in two main flavors. First, you have channel proteins. These are basically just open doorways, little tunnels. If you're the right size and charge, boom, you can zip right on through. Then you have carrier proteins. These are more like a revolving door. They actually have to grab a molecule on one side, physically change their shape, and then release it on the other side.
And this table really lays out the differences. I mean, just look at the speed. Channel proteins are lightning fast. We're talking tens of millions of ions per second. Carriers are much, much slower. But the really important difference is that last row, saturation. Because carrier proteins have to physically bind to every single molecule, they can get backed up. They can get full, kind of like a bus during rush hour. There's a maximum speed, and once they hit it, they just can't go any faster, no matter how many molecules are waiting in line.
And this right here is a powerful real-world example of what happens when those carriers get saturated. In a person with diabetes, you can have a massive amount of glucose in the blood. The carrier proteins in the kidneys are working as fast as they possibly can to pull it back in, but there's just too much. They become completely overwhelmed, totally saturated. The leftover glucose has nowhere to go, so it gets flushed out of the body, literally spilling into the urine.
So we've talked a lot about the stuff dissolved in water, but what about the water itself? Well, it's time for our next section, where we're going to see that water movement follows its own very special and incredibly important set of rules.
This process is called osmosis, and really it's just a special name for the diffusion of water. But a super simple way to think about it is this: water always moves toward the area with more stuff dissolved in it. It's like water sees a crowded party and rushes over to try and dilute it, to balance things out.
Now, this might sound simple, but the consequences of osmosis can be incredibly dramatic. So let's think about a really chilling scenario, a potentially fatal medical mistake. What happens if the fluid that's injected into a patient's veins isn't perfectly balanced with the fluid inside their cells?
Well, if the solution is hypotonic, that means it's more watery, it has less stuff dissolved in it than the inside of a red blood cell. So what does water do? It follows the rules of osmosis and rushes from the solution into the cells to try and balance things out. The cell swells up like a water balloon until, pop, it literally bursts and is destroyed.
The exact opposite happens with a hypertonic solution. In this case, the fluid outside has more stuff dissolved in it than the cell, so water rushes out of the cell, causing it to shrivel up and shrink like a raisin. All the cell's internal machinery gets gummed up, its functions break down, and that can also lead to cell death.
And that's why the goal is always an isotonic solution. This is the just right state, where the concentration of stuff inside and outside the cell is perfectly balanced. Water still moves, but it flows in and out at an equal rate. The cells stay stable, healthy, and functional. And this is why getting the balance right in medical infusions is, quite literally, a matter of life and death.
Okay, let's zoom out for a second and wrap this all up. We've looked at diffusion, protein helpers, the special rules for water. So, why does all of this passive transport matter so much? What's the big takeaway? It all comes down to this one single number: 0. Every single process we have talked about today, every molecule of oxygen delivered to your muscles, every drop of water keeping your cells in balance, all of it happens for free. It costs the cell 0 energy, no ATP required. It's an unbelievably efficient system that just runs on the basic laws of physics. So, to recap, we've seen 3 main ways that cells just go with the flow. You've got simple diffusion for the easy stuff that can slip right through. You've got facilitated diffusion, using those protein channels and carriers for molecules that need an escort. And you've got osmosis, the all-important rulebook for how water moves. Together, they are the absolute foundation of how a cell stays alive.
And that brings us to one final thought. Everything we talked about is about moving downhill, from a high concentration to a low one. It's easy, it's free. But what happens when a cell needs to do the exact opposite? What happens when it needs to fight against the flow, to hoard a substance by pulling it from where there's less to where there's already more? Well, that means moving against the current. And that, my friends, is a story for another time.